The footage in this film is not always easy to watch, but there's a quote that says that we must not resist with our eyes what they are forced to endure with their bodies. And if we turn away from their suffering, it doesn't mean their suffering no longer exists. Their suffering does exist, it happens every second of the day. And as caretakers of this planet, which is what we are, we have a responsibility to watch, endure, and bear witness to what these beings who live their lives in much the same ways that we do. We are obliged to acknowledge and face what it is that they endure at the hands of ourselves, our species. And so the footage in this film is troubling, it's disturbing, and please, at any point, feel free to leave and take a break. But we always ask that if you do leave, try and come back, especially for the end where there'll be a talk, because I think it's important when we see this stuff, we can feel a whole host of emotions, but afterwards we have to come to terms with how we feel. And we should rationalise how we feel, because there's a reason these things are happening. And often we can feel angry, and we can feel frustrated and full of despair and hopelessness. But when we rationalise, we talk about these issues, and we get to the bottom of why it is they're happening, we can actually be feeling invigorated, empowered, and hopeful to know that we can create the change that we all desperately want to see in this world. So thank you so much for being here. If you must leave, I would implore you to ask yourself this question. If it's not good enough for my eyes, why is it good enough for my stomach? I want to say, again, a huge thank you to all of you for being here and for watching it and for sticking through it. It's 2 hours, it's a long film, it's grueling, it's relentless, it feels like it's not going to end, and with each animal that comes up, there's that sense of dread for what you know you're going to see and what you know happens to these animals. I think before I kind of get into maybe the how and why of why we do these things, it's important to make a few important differentiations and important notes. I myself fall victim of this. When I see footage like this and I watch these films, I watch the people doing these things, the slaughterhouse workers, the farmers, and I think, what sort of person could do this? And I think, what sort of evil person must you be to be the one to take the lives of these animals and treat them in that way? But that is, it's a narrow-minded way of thinking, because ultimately the responsibility of what happens to these animals is on the hands of the consumer, and on the hands of those who pay for these products, because by paying for these products, we fuel the wages of these people. Now, most people would never want to work in these facilities, especially slaughterhouses. And these industries are aware of that. They know that what happens in these places, we as a society find morally repugnant and morally reprehensible. And that's why they put these places, these houses of slaughter, in areas of impoverishment, in areas where there isn't the job opportunities that many of us are very lucky to have in wealthier cities and wealthier areas. And in doing so, they force people that don't have the options that many of us have they force them into these jobs. They have families to feed, they have children to feed, and as such, they don't have the abundance of options, and often their hands are tied in the sense that they take these jobs because they simply don't have a choice. And in doing so, slaughtering these animals day in, day out, they become desensitized to violence. They no longer see these animals as animals, because if they were to do so, the mental toll that would have on them and the psychological toll that would have on them would be almost unthinkable. So they dehumanize, or they depersonalize these animals. They remove their personalities from them, they remove their life and their sentience from them and view them as property, as commodities. And in doing so, it makes the action of killing animals day in, day out, that bit more palatable. And a lot of these times, these workers have high rates of mental health problems. They have some of the highest rates of PTSD, depression, anxiety, drug and alcohol abuse, even suicide, parallel to that of the military, because of the psychological toll it takes to do these things to animals. So when we talk about veganism, it's important to know that veganism is a human rights issue as well as a non-human rights issue. Everyone, any species, all species, are negatively impacted and affected by our use and exploitation of animals. And as such, as we claim to care about our own species, we also have a moral obligation to be vegan, because these people are also exploited and are also victims. And although they may laugh, and although they may seem to find pleasure in the torture they commit to these animals, the blood is very much on the hands of the consumer, not on the hands of those who are doing the killing directly. We are all culpable in the continuation of these industries, and until we realise that, it is hypocritical of us. It is nonsensical of us to point the finger at those who do the killing whilst we pay their wages. I think that's a really important thing to note. And I also want to say, in an uplifting sense, that there are sanctuaries. And there are sanctuaries here in Victoria, well outside of Victoria, but indeed on Vancouver Island, and we can visit those places, and we can see these animals, and we can connect with these animals, and we can find out about these animals' stories. Rasta Sanctuary is one of the sanctuaries that we raise money for tonight, that you guys generously donated to give money to tonight, to have a pig who escaped from a slaughterhouse truck. They were being taken to be killed, and the pig fought to survive and escape, and in doing so they now get to live out their life in freedom, in harmony, in peace and tranquility. But all these animals deserve that, not just the ones who were lucky enough to escape from the death camp trucks. They all deserve to live a life of happiness. But we should go to these sanctuaries, we should reconnect these animals, because it's one thing seeing what happens to them, but when we get a connection with them, and we get to sit with these animals and see them how they should be allowed to live, it helps us understand that behind those eyes there is a person. Just like behind our eyes, there is a person. Behind their eyes, there is an individual. An individual has a preference to live their life whose value of life they assign to themselves, in much the same way that we assign our own value of life to ourselves as well. Now, I think it's important to note for those who maybe aren't vegan here, I know there are a few of you out there, that most of us in this room who are vegan weren't born that way, and I certainly wasn't. You see, for almost 21 years of my life, I consumed animal products. And it's not just that I consumed them, it's that I loved them. I enjoyed the taste of these products. I looked forward to the taste of these products. I craved it. It was something that satisfied me on a daily basis. Fried chicken and Domino's pizza were my two all-time favourite things. I had a KFC about a 10-minute walk from my home, and I'd go there pretty much 3 or 4 times a week, 3 times a week minimum, and I'd buy fried chicken from there. In fact, I went in there so often that people who worked there knew me by my name and knew what my favourite order was, which was a Zinger box meal. And I'd walk in there and they'd go, "Hi Ed, would you like your Zinger box meal?" I'd say, "Yes, please." I had absolutely no respect for the animals' lives who'd been taken on my behalf. And I always feel like I could put my hands in the air and say I didn't know what was happening, but the truth be told, I'd seen some of the footage before, and I was aware of what happened to these animals, and I was consciously aware that they died for me, yet I shrugged their suffering aside because I valued the sensory pleasure that eating their flesh gave to me over the life of an animal. And as such, one of the things I like to say to people now who continue to consume animal products is, which do we value more, life or taste? Now, we all agree that life is more important than taste. Ask me that question 5 years ago, I'd have said life over taste, yet here I was going into KFC, or I should say there I was, going into KFC and valuing taste over life. If we say life is more important, then to continue to buy these products is a direct hypocrisy to our own morality, our own values, and our own ethics. It's important in this world that we don't just speak of peace, we don't just speak of harmony, but we act on those feelings. It's no good just to say that we want a world where suffering is no longer around. We have to fight to create that world, and the best way to do that is to assess our own actions. If we speak of peace, do we live through peace? If we speak to end suffering, do we partake in suffering? Because if we do, we have no right to speak of this. And like I used to speak of peace, world peace, the end of suffering, I still partook in those industries and perpetuated those systems by buying these products. Now, I was an animal lover like most of us were, and I was developed, or I was enveloped, should I say, in a moral hypocrisy where I preached loving animals, but then I paid for animals to suffer. I would go to zoos because I was an animal lover. I liked seeing these animals, and for some reason I'd watch lions pace up and down in their prisons, and I wouldn't make the connection that they were prisoners. I would look through the metal bars and I'd see these animals and I'd recognise that they were hemmed in by 4 walls, never allowed to truly live their life. But I said that I went there because I enjoyed nature. It was a marvellous thing to see these animals in their natural habitats. I'd watch David Attenborough documentaries, particularly ones about orca whales and marine animals, whilst eating fish and chips, or eating fried chicken, or eating a cow-fired burger. I was developed, or I was enveloped, like I said before, in this moral schizophrenia almost, where I preached one thing, but I lived another thing. My morality was confused by my actions. Now, if we take an idea, a very simple idea, and you put that idea into society long enough, over time it becomes a societal norm. If you keep fueling that societal norm, over time it forms part of society's culture, and if you pass culture on generation to generation, over time it becomes part of tradition. Now, the idea that I'm referring to when I talk about societal ideas is the idea that using animals for human benefit is normal, natural, and necessary. This is the idea that we had instilled into our society, and at a time, maybe hundreds of years ago, it was a necessity. But our society has developed and evolved so much so that in 2018 we can no longer cling on to morality of days gone by. We must understand that our society and civilization has a moral duty and obligation to evolve and adapt. And in doing so, we as individuals have a moral obligation and duty to evolve and adapt. So this idea that we had installed in us, can we still cling on to that? Can we still say and still claim that using animals for human gain and benefit is normal, natural, and necessary? Let's look across the world. There's some footage in the film of dogs being murdered in China. And that piece of footage, however brief it may be, is incredibly inflammatory and incredibly offensive. It makes us feel full of horror. And in many ways, I feel the speciesism in myself, because I see what happens and I think, dogs, how horrible. But what happens to all the other animals in the film is equally as horrible. Yet our cultural connotations and cultural indoctrination almost makes us respond worse to what happens to dogs in China. But morally, what is the difference? What is the difference between harming and abusing dogs and cats, and indeed even whales and dolphins, compared to harming, abusing and murdering pigs and cows and chicken and sheep, and all the animals who are abused and murdered, indeed in Canada, the US, and across the whole world in general? What is the difference between these animals? They are all alive. They can all feel. They can all suffer. And because they have the capacity to feel and suffer, they have an inherent preference to avoid the feelings of pain and suffering. So who are we? Who are we to inflict pain and suffering onto living, sentient, conscious beings who wish to avoid the feelings of pain and suffering? Who are we as individuals, but also as a species, to submit these animals to a life of torture and eventual death when it's needless and completely unnecessary? And can we claim to be compassionate, evolved, superior, intellectually superior, when we can't see the insanity of what occurs every second of the day all around us? These things that happen to animals, they're not done in far-off countries or in places far from where we live. They're done everywhere. This violence is committed everywhere because we as a species have ingrained ourselves to think that our life has higher value and worth than their life. That because we've been born into this body, into this species, that somehow allows us to have the right to live our life and also inflict pain and death onto these beings. But our life here on this planet is just the same as their life. We are born, we live, and we die. That is the true circle of life. We cannot use the circle of life justification to take these animals' lives, just as we can't use the circle of life justification to take indeed our own species' life. Their trajectory is the same as ours, and therefore fundamentally their right to life is the same as ours. We have no right as a species to do these things to living beings who value their life in the same way that we value our life. So, what right do we have? We see this footage, we look at what's happening to animals, we've got to ask ourselves the question, what right do we have as individuals? Can we possibly justify these actions being continued to be perpetuated onto these living beings? Or do we have to self-reflect and ask ourselves the question, why am I still continuing to purchase and buy these products now that I know the truth of what is happening to these beings? I think it's important that we look at also the excuses that people use, because there are many excuses that we like to fall back on to justify this behaviour. And one of them fundamentally is the notion of a food chain. Often we like to use a food chain because food chains are natural. They occur in nature. In fact, they're fundamental to the survival of the ecosystems in which they are about, or in which they are found upon. So a food chain helps maintain natural population sizes. It helps maintain the natural ecology, and basically it allows the ecosystems to thrive and run successfully. However, what we do to animals, as we can see in this film, when we forcibly impregnate them, when we selectively breed them, when we take their babies away from them, when we mutilate them, when we lock them in prisons and mutilate by chopping off their teeth and cutting their tails out and castrating them and disbudding them and dehorning them and forcibly impregnating them and taking their babies away from them and taking their milk and their eggs. And we load them into slaughterhouses, hang them upside down and cut their throats or put them into gas chambers and burn them from the inside out. Carbon dioxide cannot even slightly be compared to that of a food chain, because what we do to animals couldn't be further detached from the natural order. It does nothing to maintain ecosystems or population sizes of animals. It does nothing to help maintain ecosystems or the natural ecology of our world. In fact, it does the opposite. It destroys it. It decimates wildlife and habits and forests and our oceans. What we do to animals is killing our planet. And therefore, to use the natural order to try and justify these things is not only an injustice to the animals, but is incredibly disingenuous to the reality of what is happening to Mother Earth every second of the day. Now, often people like to claim that we are naturally designed to eat animals, that that's something that we were born and raised to do, and biologically, anatomically, we're designed to do. However, when we see this footage, none of us feel hungry. We feel disgusted. We get put off our food. And this always strikes me strange because often I say to people, watch this film, watch this slaughterhouse footage, see what happens to pigs or to cows or to chickens or to ducks or to any animal. And people say, I don't want to see that because it'll upset me and it'll put me off my food. But why? If we're naturally designed to eat these animals, if it's in our nature to eat animal products, then why does seeing what happens to these sentient beings put us off the food that we claim it is natural for us to eat? Why is it that slaughterhouses don't have glass walls? And why is this footage often deemed illegal to obtain in many places around the world? If it was normal, natural and necessary, not only would we be able to watch this footage, but we would be the ones partaking in the killing of these animals ourselves. Yet so few of us will take the responsibility to have the blood literally on our hands. Instead, we like to go into supermarkets and buy the products wrapped in plastic and pretend that we're not accountable for what happens to these animals up until the point they are murdered and butchered, mutilated, and wrapped in the cellophane that we see so conveniently stacked on the supermarket shelves in our day-to-day life. Why is it that what happens to animals is so morally repugnant to us, yet we claim that it is natural and we are designed to do these things to these living beings? Now, I often like to think of children in this situation. And I think of what it was like when we were first born and we were being raised as children, how our perception of animals has changed so much as we've been raised into this society. Now, no child sees the life of a pig different to that of a dog. No child sees the life of a piglet different to that of a puppy. In fact, if you put a 3-year-old child in a room with a piglet and a puppy, that child will play with both of those animals the same, with equal determination, with equal joy, with equal happiness. I was at a slaughterhouse in Houston, Texas not so long ago. And at the back of this slaughterhouse, there are holding pens for the animals who are waiting to be murdered in that facility. Now, bystanders, members of the public, can go in there and they can choose the animals they want to have killed on their behalf. And they had goats, and they had sheep, and they had chickens in there as well. Now, I watched, and I stood by the pens, and I watched this father come in with his child, who was about 2 years old. And I watched the child approach the pen of goats. And as soon as the child saw the goats, he started pointing at the goats, laughing hysterically. He was so happy to see the animals. He thought they were wonderful. He was laughing his head off. He couldn't believe how wonderful they were. Now he turned, and there was a cat from one of the neighbouring houses there. And he saw the cat, and the child did the exact same thing. He pointed at the cat, and he laughed hysterically. He saw the cat as the same as a goat. He saw the animals equal to one another. He found them both joyous to witness, both so fulfilling to see in that moment. But what he did not know was that his father stood over him in that moment, was looking at the goats, deciding which one he should have killed on his behalf. One of the goats that child was so happy to see was soon about to be taken into the back room and killed. And later on in that day, that child would probably end up eating one of the goats that he was so happy to see. As children, we don't want to see animals have suffering committed upon them. We value their life. We find their life to be joyous. But as we grow older and older, it's up to the parents and the older people in society to tell that child that some animals are here for us and some animals are here with us. And as a child, we understandably don't see the moral distinction between life. We see life as equal, as sacred, as deserving of that life. But what we do to children is sickening. We lie to them. We give them scams and propaganda. They buy Happy Meals at McDonald's where they get given a toy to pretend these animals haven't been murdered. We see adverts on TV for Laughing Cow cheese where the dairy cows are so happy that they're having their milk stolen from them. What we don't tell our children is what really happens. Often when we do events and we screen this kind of footage, parents will shield their children's eyes. And that's understandable because it's distressing to see. Yet if we don't want our child to see what happens to animals, why are we happy for our child to consume the products of what we do to these sentient, conscious, living beings? And I reiterate those words often, sentient, conscious, living, because it's so important to understand these animals are not inanimate objects. They're not its. They're he's and she's and they's, just like the narrator in the film said. They're not inanimate objects for us to use at our disposal. They're alive, like we are. And although they may not have the cognitive abilities that we have as a species, although they may not have the dreams, aspirations that we possess as a species, fundamentally what they want is the same as us, to live a good life, to be with their families, to be with their friends, to do what comes natural to them. That is what unites us. That's what unites all species. The fundamental expectation to a life without exploitation, without pain, and without suffering. Now imagine if every child that was born into this world, imagine if they were taught the life of a chicken should be valued in the same way as the life of their companion animal, dog or cat. Or indeed, imagine if we taught that child that the life of the chicken should be valued in the same way that they value their own life. Imagine if we taught a child that a fish in the ocean, a fish whose life may seem inconsequential, a fish whose life they will never meet. Imagine if we taught them that that fish should just be allowed to live their life and not have to worry about being taken from their habitat by humans who want to eat them for absolutely no necessary reason whatsoever. Imagine if we taught every child from this moment on that all life, regardless of form, regardless of species, regardless of how they look, should just have that life respected and cherished. Imagine how much we could achieve as a species if we made compassion, equality, tolerance, and justice the foundations of the world that we live in. Because the moment that we teach our children that some life is for us to love and some life is for us to use, is the moment that we teach them that some life has different value to other life. It's the moment that we teach them that some life has higher value than other life. If we truly want to rid the world of oppression and suffering, indeed to our own species as well, we must address all forms of oppression. Or we must look at what we teach our children, because to truly eradicate the suffering that we commit, we must start to see all life as having equal value in their right to live that life. If we want world peace, let's not just talk of it, let's create it together. And the simplest way that we can do that is by omitting suffering from our day-to-day life. Now, people sometimes look at this footage and they say this is propaganda. They say this is bad farms and bad slaughterhouses and bad practices, and they take isolated clips from these places to illustrate the point that they want to illustrate. And this doesn't represent the industry as a whole. In Canada, we have these farms and they're painted that beautiful red colour, and we're told of traditional local farming cultures by families who treat their animals with respect and care, and we're fed that lie and that propaganda. We go to supermarkets and we're given labels like free range and happy milk and happy dairy cows, and we obligingly pick up those products and fall for the scam. We fall for that lie every single time. I know that I too was responsible for that, because I'd buy free range eggs thinking that the animals lived a good life, thinking that the farmers followed the hens in the field picking up the eggs as they dropped them. But the reality is very much different to that. And we know the truth now. So we have to look at these labels, we have to look at what is being perpetuated by these industries and assess whether or not there are vested interests that cause these industries to want to lie to us. Remember, they operate only on supply and demand, meaning that they can only survive when we buy those products. And the moment we stop buying the products is the moment those industries stop functioning. So they need to sell us a product that we want to buy. So we see that box of free-range eggs in the supermarket, what we do is we say, those hens must have lived a good life, because freedom to us means living a good life. We say they must have lived without pain, exploitation, suffering, and fear, because being truly free to us means living without pain, suffering, exploitation, and fear. But we know that's not the truth. We know these hens come from hatcheries where the males are macerated, where they're debeat, where they're exploited for their eggs, in which they produce far more than they ever should in the wild. And we know they all end up in a slaughterhouse, where they're killed brutally and completely needlessly. We've seen labels with happy milk and organic milk, and we're sold alive farmers loving their animals, loving their dairy cows as they do their own children. But what we don't realise, or we often fail to see, is the forceful impregnation of these animals. The fact that babies are taken away from them, the fact that they mourn and grieve for their lost children, the fact that they're exploited for the milk they produce for their child, and the fact that they're all taken to a slaughterhouse to meet the same grisly end as all the other animals that we exploit for the foods that we consume. We have to look beyond these labels. We can no longer be fooled by these industries that have to sell us a product. We have to seek the truth. And now that we know the truth, now we've seen this footage, can we still claim to bury our heads in the sand and be willfully ignorant? Or do we have to accept the responsibility that lies on each and every one of our shoulders that says that when we know better, we have an obligation to do better? And we all have an obligation to do better. So the time is now for us to act, because we're aware. We know the truth. We've seen the truth. And with that is a responsibility to spread that truth. We must not only be vegan, we must be voices for those whose voices exist. They're not voiceless, but they are suppressed. They are oppressed. And even though they scream in these facilities, the screams are often not heard by the consumers. but we have an obligation to be their voice, the voice they have but they cannot use to defend themselves. We have a responsibility to defend ourselves. The film is called Dominion because people claim that we have dominion over animals, but really we have a responsibility over these animals because we are physically stronger, we are more dominant than they are. But that does not give us the right to impose suffering and rule over them. Instead, it means that because they are more vulnerable than us, we have a duty to protect them, just in the same way that we protect those who are more vulnerable in our human society as well. They are vulnerable. They are the most vulnerable beings on this planet, and as caretakers of this world, which we all are, we therefore have that duty to look after them, to nurture them, to provide them the life they should be allowed to live. So we must ask ourselves those questions again that I asked you earlier. What right do we have? What do we value more, taste or life? And if we say life, let's mean it. Let's prove it. Prove it to ourselves and prove it to society. Because the world is changing, and every second of the day's industries are growing more fearful of the change that is coming, because the information and truth is getting out there. For too long they've hidden behind lies and scams and the facade of the deceit they perpetuate in the supermarkets. But the truth is now getting out there and is being spread among the consumers. And rightfully so, we are disgusted by what is happening, because what is happening is disgusting and it's an atrocity that should be ended. I promise you that one day we will teach our children that what we did to animals was an abomination, but we woke up and we learned the truth and we changed our actions, and we will never repeat what it is that we did before. Now, I don't want to keep you for too much longer because I understand that it's been a very long evening and emotionally very draining and overwhelming. But I ask all of you in here tonight, those of you who are not yet vegan, please, 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 look into the eyes of these animals. See the person that exists behind those eyes. Understand their right to life and make a simple change. Ask yourselves those questions. What do we value more? What right do we have? If you say life, and if you understand that we have no right, then please make that simple change, because the change is ever so simple and so much more accessible than it's ever been before. It's never been easier to be vegan. Not that ease should negate responsibility, but with that responsibility, we also now have that ease. There is no justification any longer. Please change. And for all of those who are vegan tonight, come to Vegetoria tomorrow. Everyone in this room, come to Vegetoria tomorrow. See the other world that we can have, the world of delicious food, the world of joy, the world of happiness that we can all exist in together in this planet. See the future that it is that we all want to create. And if you are vegan, then please fight for these animals. Be active. Be the voice that you would want to be if you were those, or you were the one in that system. If you were the ones suffering so terribly. Please take that responsibility to create a different world, because that obligation lies on each and every one of our shoulders. Don't just talk of peace. Don't just talk of harmony or tranquility or equality. Act on it. Create it. Not for you, not for ourselves, but for those who need it, for the animals, for the generations of those who are yet to be bred into existence, but who will suffer the same fate as those alive today do if we do not act now. Please act now, because we have no more time. They have no more time. And each second that we sit and we allow these atrocities to continue, regardless of whether we are vegan or not, every second that we are silent is a second we remain complicit, and we can no longer be complicit in these industries. We have to fight to bring about an end and a change to this world. Please, please fight for them. Fight for our future of the planet. Fight for the future of humanity. Fight for those who need us to fight for them. Use our position of power and dominance to bring about a fairer, more just world, indeed to our own species, but all species as well. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate you listening to what you said tonight.